Welcome back to part 2 for Reign of X, X-Men theories. In part 1 of our X-Men Reign of X theories, we covered Mad Jim Jaspers, Emma Frost and the Hellfire Club, Legion, Maverick and Wolverine, and Tarn the Uncaring, Today we will cover number 6 through number 11 on the Marvel promo teaser image. Again, we're going piece by piece, character by character through this. We're going to talk about Monet St. Croix and Warren Worthington, Storm, Quentin Quire, Arcade, Bei and Doug, and of course, S.w.or.d. as I talk about what do these symbols mean, who are these characters, what theories and ideas based on what we've seen in the Hickman era of X-Men and the Dawn of X and 10 of Swords event, can we expect moving forward into what is now the Reign of X for X-Men. Again, this is part 2 of a 3-part series, and I'll be answering what all these clues and hints mean for the next era of X-Men. Again, you are listening to Krakin Krakoa, number 129. I'm Dave Busing, founder and editor-in-chief of Comic Book Herald. This should be a fun romp through lots of wild theories and predictions. If you like the Comic Book Herald YouTube channel or Krakin Krakoa, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing with the channel here, and of course, commenting with theories and predictions of your own, whether it's what you think of my predictions, what you think is going to come, and then of course in part 3 we will tackle the remaining characters. So you don't have to just talk about the characters that are here in part 2, but that will be the focus of conversation. Now, spoilers for comics that have come in the past, and if some have sort of warned about and said potential future spoilers here as well when my precog gene, X gene, is kicking in, okay? I don't actually have any inside knowledge, but of course I will do my best to suggest what I think might happen. So let's talk first about the image here of Monet and Angel, aka Warren Worthington. Monet and Warren, who are they? Well, Monet St. Croix and Warren Worthington are both longtime players in X-Men history, obviously with Warren as one of the original 5. That's a bit of an understatement. And they've shown up throughout the Hickman era of X-Men in House and Powers, Empire X-Men, and 10 of Swords. The most interesting element of their inclusion together, and despite Angel's penchant for those nubile underage Gen Xers, I don't think he and Monet have a romantic history before this point, is that in the Empire X-Men miniseries, we saw Monet and Warren on official X-Corps business before getting wrapped up in a classic Plants vs. Zombies vs. Aliens vs. Mutants brouhaha, right? But we do see them effectively, I don't know about founding, but running the X-Corps operations. Now, an X-Corps ongoing series was teased previously, and if not an ongoing, then at least a plot involving Warren and Monet's exploits with the business side of the X-Corporations seems very likely, and I think that is an interesting angle for both of these characters to be taking. I mean, I didn't realize the first time either, but it's cool that both Warren and Monet are seen half transformed into their various more bloodthirsty alter egos, Archangel for Warren and Penance for Monet, and they're half all business, right? They're like mullet mutants but split down the middle. This could be, I think, potentially the Cy Spurrier book. We saw him kind of getting integrated and teasing out this X-Men Reign of X promo teaser on Twitter. Cy Spurrier is a great comic book writer who presumably will be joining the X Office sometime here in the near future. Could he be taking on the X-Corps book that we've talked about in the past? And for those of you who don't really know what X-Corps is, I've talked about it in the past, but again, it's like there's not a ton to this beyond like this is the business side of the X-Men operating in the Marvel Universe. It's the X-Corporation, and it's a concept that originates from writer Grant Morrison's time on New X-Men from 2001 to 2004, okay? It's various settlements or business practices across the world, and we already know they have these various Krakoan embassies around the world, having X-Corps sort of tied into that, navigating mutant rights and the legal side and the business side of all this. That is an interesting angle to explore too, like how mutants actually function in the world. Okay, getting on to another big one, real big one, number 7, let's talk about the tease for Storm. So the final pages of 10 of Swords tease that Storm is setting her sights to the stars. And we've also heard X-Men group editor Jordan D. White previously tease a huge story arc coming for Storm in 2021. Okay, so here's my theory. My first reaction was to predict the X-Office will launch a Storm ongoing in which Storm sets off into space to seek out alien mutants and work as a cosmic liaison for Krakoa. We also know from the solicits to X-Men number 17 that the issue will feature Cyclops, Rachel, Summers, and Storm heading into Shi'ar space. Now, in the comments, Krakin Krakoa listeners have also suggested a connection to the recent Ta-Nehisi Coates and Daniel Acuna Black Panther, where T'Challa and occasionally Storm have encountered Wakanda's long-lost presence in space. I think we combine these two ideas. We have Storm as an alien ambassador for mutants, while simultaneously Queen of Space for the Wakandans. This would be cool as hell, essentially with Storm in her rightful position as cosmic goddess, Queen of Space. And we have also seen these connections with Storm and Wakanda, obviously not necessarily, suggesting a connection, because she broke in to Wakanda during the Ten of Swords event and stole, one of their precious artifacts. Of course, there was basically in a grand exercise in we have a failure to communicate here. But nonetheless, I do think like Storm and T'Challa, there's a divide that those characters have suffered, but I think potentially they will reconnect, and we could see that in this kind of cosmic odyssey that is coming for Storm. Plus, we have Jonathan Hickman has done a lot with the Super Guardians of the Shi'ar, including the, I think, newly invented Death Commandos. Surely this type of world building is for a purpose, I think. And I think, again, we have Storm in that X-Men number 17 solicit already going and connecting with the Shi'ar. Could she be leading a group of Shi'ar Death Commandos, right? Some sort of new sort of space team to put her with would be very interesting. The remaining mystery, too, with Storm is like she's holding an orb in that promo image, okay? Giant-sized Storm, it developed this world, essentially, this new life form. It could be related to that giant-size issue written by Hickman. But I do have to say, too, like, anytime I see a crystal like that, my mind's jumping to the M'Kraan crystal the X-Men dealt with in the Phoenix Saga back in the Chris Claremont and Dave Cockrum days, okay? Could Storm team up with Shi'ar Death Commandos hunting for various M'Kraan crystals across the galaxy, or shards of the original M'Kraan crystal, or something like that? This cosmic artifact that could mean reality warping or absolute pandemonium for mutant kind. I think that type of role would be really cool to see Storm to take on. I'm sure there are lots of other directions this could go, and I look forward to hearing in the comments what you think is coming for Storm, because again, we've been told 2021 is going to be a huge year for Aurora Monroe, and I, for one, am very much looking forward to that. Number 8 on our list, the image of Quentin Quire and, of course, Kid Omega. So in the Reign of X teaser, we see Quentin overflowing with power, which could be interpreted as either a very bad thing, someone forcing this state and sort of blowing him up from the inside out, or a positive metamorphosis in which Omega-level Quentin levels up, right, to some sort of newfound ability. Now, in the Dawn of X-Force story so far, the death of Quentin Quire has become a running gag. At this point, I can't imagine anyone has been resurrected more frequently. Presumably, his X-Force status gets him priority placed in line, because otherwise I think Quentin would just be sitting in a queue like all the time. Most recently, Mikhail Rasputin, brother of Colossus, captured yet another dead Quentin and gave his body to Xeno, the terrorist organization that's been working against X-Force and Krakoa from issue number 1 in X-Force when they assassinated Professor X, okay? So not a good place for Quentin Quire to be, I think, no bones about it. So Benjamin Percy and artist Joshua Cassara have said in interviews that Quentin has some big moments coming, and judging from X-Force solicits for issues 16 and 17, the character is very much in the mix. So it sure seems like he's going to get his moment finally after dying constantly, whatever Xeno's plans might be for his body, for his corpse. The question is, what does that mean for Omega-level Quentin to get his moment? For starters, given his status as one of a very limited set of Omega-level mutants in the Marvel Universe, it's about time we see Quentin begin to realize his power and become a force to be reckoned with. I do find it interesting that Omega-levels in this era of Hickman X-Men are this incredible resource and asset on Krakoa, but if you consider those that we see in action so far in the Dawn of X, it's not like being an Omega level is some overpowered, unbeatable status. Sure, there's Quentin, but consider also Jean Grey, Iceman, Storm, all Omega level mutants who have either died, nearly died, or at a minimum been extremely threatened. Just because they're on this list doesn't mean they can just rush into battle alone and it's an automatic W. So far, the Omega level we've seen behave the most like an Omega level mutant warrior is Magneto during the Empire event, wiping out whole swaths of the Kotati invading forces. Vulcan, I guess, does something similar as well, sort of, when he sort of lashes out finally on the moon. I think another possibility for Quentin that is kind of always hanging in the wings is Quentin Quire as the Phoenix, okay? This has been teased since Jason Aaron did so much work on the character in Wolverine and the X-Men, and even well before that in some of the post-New X-Men, Phoenix Endsong, Phoenix Warsong miniseries, right? Quentin ending up in a future timeline as a Phoenix is not a preordained outcome, but in certain future timelines, it's definitely like, oh yeah, that's going to happen. Now, whether the Hickman era will lean into this or not, we don't know, right? We don't really know what the plans are for the Phoenix, of course, but Quentin always has ties here in ways that will be interesting. We have a lot of characters like this, right? Jean Grey, of course, most famously has ties to the Phoenix in ways that may or may not get explored. But Quentin, for me, is an interesting one because, like, we've seen these futures where he's the Phoenix. Does he actually tap into that power, and what does that mean for the character? Next up, I would say the wildest inclusion on this card, just because, again, not actually a mutant. We got MF and Arcade. So who is Arcade? Well, it's the only human non-mutant on the teaser. Okay, Nimrod is the only other non-mutant, and a longtime thorn in the X-Men side. Arcade is a Chris Claremont and John Byrne creation from before their work together on Uncanny X-Men, although Arcade would famously resurface there as well. He's an assassin who constructs elaborate murder world simulations, often murderous games and traps, and has tried to kill various members of the X-Men and related teams dozens of times. I don't know that he's explicitly anti-mutant, but if Xeno or Orcus shows up with a bucket of money, you can bet Arcade will set out to murder some mutants, right? That is what he does. He is an assassin for hire. He gets off on constructing these very, very elaborate death traps. What's the last we've seen of Arcade? Well, technically we've seen Arcade in Marvel more recently, but the most interesting use of the character for me in recent years came from the Dennis Hallam written Avengers Arena and the sequel Avengers Undercover, when Arcade got super into Hunger Games and put like all the kid heroes in the Marvel Universe on a murder island. What mutant kids were here? Well, for example, we had like Laura Kinney among the Avengers Arena kids, but most notably, actually, I think is Cullen Bloodstone was one of the 18, and a character we've seen reappear in the pages of the Teenie Howard written Excalibur. I could see Arcade in the pages of Excalibur for that reason, or the fact that Arcade has previously kidnapped kids for his murderous amusement made me think he could be the one pulling the strings in the New Mutants and turning the Wild Hunt into his own murder Krakoa. He's had murder islands before. Why not hijacking parts of Okara for similar purposes? I think that would be very much up Arcade's alley. I think I have to mention too, like, okay, there's these playing cards flying around Arcades, and it was interesting to me consider, like, are these playing cards supposed to be Arcades? That what do you call it? Iconography is not necessarily the most directly tied to Arcade specifically. Characters most associated with playing cards are like Bullseye and Gambit, So I thought one thing that'd be cool is what if Xeno, terrorist organization, or any other types of, entity that the X-Men are facing, what if they're hiring known Marvel assassins to take out mutants now, right? We've seen Xeno already having assassination plots for Professor X. What if they start hiring the likes of Arcade and Bullseye and these various characters, and they have kind of an assassinate, mutants agenda? I think that would be a really interesting way to integrate some more of the Marvel Universe into these X-Men stories. A small detail that I will mention here is the cards. If you actually take a look at the numbers on them, it reveals an inside straight, which may mean absolutely nothing, but it could also mean an inside job, which we know that there's an inside mole that Xeno has on Krakoa currently. Could those two things be connected? Almost certainly not, but it's a possibility. Number 10 on the list, good old, wedded, blissfully married, Bei, the Blood Moon, and Doug Ramsey. One of the most surprising moments in all of Ten of Swords is when Doug and Bei, the Blood Moon, are set up to square off in the Arakko vs. Krakoa tournament, only to have Saturnine flip the script and turn a presumed sword fight, which was not looking very good for Doug and his Warlock sword, into a wedding between Marvel's Cypher and seemingly the one sentient being Doug's mutant ability can't translate. In the event's conclusion, Bei does ultimately turn sides, helping Krakoa and primarily Doug in their newfound apparent deep love between two characters who cannot speak and just met. As far as I can tell, the two should be enjoying their honeymoon somewhere on Krakoa in the Reign of X, in one of the clearest examples of how mutants of Arakko will be integrated into this new era of X-Men comics, and I find Bei pretty interesting for that reason alone, right? I'm very curious to see how will the mutants of Arakko fit into what is now a reunited Okara, or at least that's the direction we seem to be going. Now, in the final pages, recounting the location of various swords, Bei and Doug's entries mirror each other, and they're, the synchronous, everything is fine teases clearly indicate, to me at least, that something bad is coming. The biggest question to ask here is, where is Warlock, who we did not really see throughout Ten of Swords, despite Doug finally revealing his presence, and who drops a very ominous, we'll be best friends forever. It sounds somewhat creepy, coming from Warlock. Now, technically, Doug and Warlock have loved the same woman before. What's up, Danger? All right, this is something I mentioned in the Ten of Swords handbook, but in, I think it's like the late, all new, all different Peter David written X Factor, I think Doug Ramsey and Warlock, they both sleep with Danger, the sentient artificial intelligence, a longtime mutant ally. It happened. All right. That is a thing that happened. There's also still a lot to be said. So my point there being like, I don't know that Warlock specifically is going to be that bothered by the presence of Bei. Okay, they've had some polyamorous relations in the past. Now, there's still a lot to be said about Doug, Warlock, and Krakoa's secret plans. Why they've infected Krakoa with a techno-organic virus, or perhaps it's less sinister. Perhaps it's simply establishing a bonding connection between Warlock and Krakoa, but this definitely needs to get developed. I think, like this is something we need to understand more about what Warlock thinks about all this, what Warlock's presence is going to be like in New Mutants. I mean, I think the situation we're going to see is we're going to see Warlock finally as a separate entity in the pages of the New Mutants comics, whereas Doug and Bei are maybe like a sort of supporting presence off on their side. But there's a lot that Cypher Doug Ramsey has to do with this era of X-Men. He's had a pretty major role so far, so it definitely a character to keep a really close eye on moving forward. All right, number 11, and the final one that I'll be talking about in part 2 here, is S.w.or.d, the Sentient World Observation Response Department. If you want a comprehensive detail and history of Marvel's S.w.or.d, again, check out my Krakin Krakoa on the full history of S.w.or.d, along with recommended reading suggestions. It's actually a very fun read to go through kind of the majority of S.w.or.d appearances in Marvel, because there aren't a ton. The image of the peak S.w.or.d station is one of the easiest teases on this promo image, given that we know Al Ewing and Valerio Schiti's S.w.or.d ongoing launch as a part of the X-Line in December 2020, right? It's one of the earliest Reign of X launches. We'll see the mutant response to the cosmic side of the Marvel Universe, in line with my working theory that we're looking for Hickman's X-Men to conquer the galaxy. Again, this is a Krakin Krakoa video I keep recommending, but I think this is where this story is going. It's called How Hickman's X-Men Will Conquer the Galaxy, and S.w.or.d is a huge, huge first step in that direction as we look into basically mutants identifying cosmic allies, right? They're increasing their numbers. They've added all these mutants over Rocco. They've added the Brood with Brew as an ally. They've added S.w.or.d the Vescora as not really an ally, but something that is mildly controlled off in Otherworld. They have a multiversal core of Captain Britons now, right? Their numbers are expanding and their power is expanding as a result. I think the cosmic side S.w.or.d, figuring out, okay, who else do we add to this picture is extremely, extremely important for mutant kind and Krakoa as they sort of move beyond just Earth. I mean, an interesting element to keep an eye out too with S.w.or.d is how thoroughly the event's launch will integrate into Marvel's King in Black event, which just launched this week at the time of this recording, with issues number 2 and 3 of S.w.or.d series labeled King in Black tie-ins. Plus, King in Black number 4 features an X-Men-centric cover. We've already seen the mutants participating in the first issue of the event. It's indicating that mutants might be even more notably affected by Null's arrival on Earth than they were the Kotati invasion in Empire. And of course, this is going to mean a heck of a lot more for S.w.or.d to do with this, its reigning symbiotes situation in the Al Ewing and Valerio Schiti written series. So I'm curious to see there as well, like in issue number 1, and I don't know if I'll do a full Krakin Krakoa on the X-Men's presence in King in Black or not. We'll kind of see how it plays out. But in issue number 1, there's a very, it's a very old school, actually, X-Men approach to tackling this invasion of Earth. It's kind of like, hey, we're here to save the day too, because that's what we do. We protect a world that fears and hates us. It kind of belies the Krakoan pragmatism that we've seen, governmentally being the solemn, isolated nation. Even in Empire and the invasion of the Kotati, that's all contained to Krakoa because that's where the Kotati fall, right? But the X-Men don't actually then branch out and be like, hey, we're going to Wakanda to help out, King in Black is changing that up a little. So, and I'm going to talk about that a bit, especially in part 3, as I talk about Scott Summers and Jean Grey and their focus here and what we saw from Scott and Jean specifically in kind of like rebuilding what it means to actually be X-Men in this era. I think the Reign of X is going to continue to solidify that. So next time, part 3, Reign of X teaser promos. You won't have to wait as long for this one. Don't worry, everything's already done. This one's coming soon. Number 12 will be Wolverine and Sync coming out of the vault. Number 13, Nimrod. Number 14, Jean and Cyclops, like I mentioned. Number 15, those shadowy figures behind Jean and Cyclops. Number 16, what I'm calling the Shadow King, what some are calling Brew, which has been interesting. And number 17, Nightcrawler. So let me know your comments and theories about the things that I talked about here in this video, about what's to come in the Reign of X, and of course, some prelude ideas for what's coming in part 3. But I hope you're all enjoying these theories and predictions for the Reign of X. I definitely enjoyed putting them together. Thanks everybody for listening. You can find ways to support Comic Book Herald over at patreon.com/Comic Book Herald. You can support the site. You can support Krakin Krakoa videos, which helps me out a great deal. And if you like getting these the reviews I do of weekly issues every week in podcast form, you can get those exclusively on the Patreon as well, in addition to a bunch of other benefits like priority access for questions, certain like custom reading playlists I put together at certain tiers, all sorts of stuff you can check out in the tiers on the Patreon. Again, go to patreon.com/Comic Book Herald for ways to support the site there. And I've got a whole bunch of new mysterious benefactors I'm going to have to add here in the coming months as well, who get their names called out here on the Krakin Krakoa vids. So thanks everybody for listening. I'm Dave. You can find my stuff comicbookherald.com, at Comic Book Herald, pretty much anywhere on social. Look for the best comics ever in My Marvelous Year podcast for more. And of course, Reign of X teasers, theories, part 3. Part 3 is coming next. It's going to be the final part. Coming soon. Subscribe and like the channel here, and you will get that first. So thanks everybody for listening, and as always, enjoy the comics.